We've talked a lot on this podcast about Johnny Gaudreau being a difference maker for the Blue Jackets, and that's what we're talking about again today. Jeff Svoboda is back to talk all things Johnny Gaudreau, and we're dipping into the NHL draft and how successful the Blue Jackets were this summer. That's all coming up today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you news, stories, trials, excitement, fun stories, and all of the above and more about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day, every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and also on YouTube. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button over there, then why not? I recommend it. It helps me out. It helps you out. You get notifications when new episodes are posted. Everybody wins. Today, we are continuing our massive season preview, off-season review with Jeff Svoboda, Jackets Insider. And today we're going to be talking about the Johnny Gaudreau signing, how exciting that is for the team, for the city, for the fans. And we're also checking in on how he thought the Blue Jackets did while drafting Denton Mateychuk and David Jiricek in the first round. So I'm just going to get right into it.
Yeah, I think that is part of it too. You are right that Sean Corrali was very happy to come home and really enjoyed his first season. It was weird, Jack Roslovic last year had until the end of the season when he finished very strong, but for about 60 games he was swimming. He was lost trying to find his game. Guys go through that, and sometimes it's like the famous finger trap. The harder you pull, the worse it gets. And I think Jack Roslovic went through a little bit of that last year. But there is, even Cole Sillinger's from Columbus, Carson Meyer making his debut. You don't necessarily want to bring guys in like that just because they're from here, because that's a great way to not have a great hockey team. But when it works out to have those types of guys on your team, it's great to have because there's some ownership there. And I think there's a lot of ownership among those guys and what that means. And it's funny because when you're talking to them about the acquisition of Johnny Gaudreau, they can talk about just how important it is to the fan base and things like that, because they used to be in the fan base. They know, what it inherently means. All those times that Blue Jackets fans felt like, the slaps in the face they felt like they kind of took, or the gut punches when so many players left. They know what it means when a guy like Johnny Gaudreau says he wants to be here. So you can't fake that. It just, it's very real, I think, for some of those guys. And it can only help if you've got the right guys. If they fit into your lineup and fit into what you're trying to do, it can have a lot of benefits. And I think the Jackets have seen that over the years, and certainly last year.
Yeah, let's talk about Johnny Gaudreau actually, because so the signing actually happened at midnight my time, because obviously I am 5 hours ahead, and so I got a text from a friend that's just my name in all caps, and I was like, oh god, what did they do? And obviously, earlier in the day they signed Eric Gabranson, who we're going to talk about in a minute, but Johnny Gaudreau, and I've been saying this all off season, this is a franchise altering signing, I think. What's the, and everyone has kind of talked about how excited they are to play with Johnny Gaudreau. Obviously Kent Johnson wears 13 because of Johnny Gaudreau, and, all of these stories that keep coming out. Like, what's the feeling in the room? Like, how excited are these guys for the team with Johnny Gaudreau?
Yeah, it's all that people have kind of talked about these first couple days, and that's natural. I don't think they're all saying, oh my goodness, Johnny Gaudreau it's all on his shoulders to make us the hockey team we want to be. Not quite that, but there is a sense of excitement because this kind of pushes things forward. I think there was a real internal belief that they were moving the right direction. They've got so many good young players. They've locked up a lot of guys they feel like are key parts of what they're trying to build here. But there was still a sense of, it's going to take a while. We're still 2 to 3 years down the road of where this is going to be. And then when you sign one of the best players in hockey, who's kind of at the height of his powers, it just makes it feel like it just feels more real. It feels like, it's not going to be 2 to 3 years down the road. It's going to be 1 to 2 years down the road. It might even be this year that we're a playoff team. And so it just puts a pep in everybody's step that, they go, I don't think anybody would have really changed their offseason workouts, but I bet it's a lot easier to get up and work out the day after your team signs Johnny Gaudreau than it was the day before. So, I think there's a lot of just excitement there that there's a real belief in where this thing is headed now. And say time will tell how long it takes to get to what the ultimate goal is. But they do feel it. I think they really do feel that there's some validation there, to what they were trying to put together and what they were doing. But Columbus is a hockey city. You say it's the most important signing in franchise history, and I completely agree because, we've seen guys leave, and they all had different reasons for leaving. And by and large, for the most part, it was not because they hated living in Columbus, Ohio, or they thought it was a bad place to be or anything like that. But they left. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. And so you can't help, as I said, the gut punches the fan base kind of took over and over again for years. It was nice to be on the other side of that, wasn't it? And so it doesn't mean everything's sunshine and rainbows and now they're going to go out there and drop the puck and win the Stanley Cup. It's not going to be that. But it sure does make everything feel a little bit better that this thing is definitely on the right track. And there's a belief in what they're trying to accomplish here, both, among the team itself and among the fan base.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the feeling I had of, we've had a lot of good players play for this team. We've had a lot of great players play for this team, but they were drafted here or they signed here, or they were traded here. But Johnny Gaudreau being the first guy to really look at, and he could have gone home. He left money on the table to go to not play for the Devils. He left money on the table for Calgary. He looked at the map and was like, you know what? I want to be in Columbus. Columbus is where I want to be. And it does feel very much like this is the first of potentially many.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going to look and be like, well, if Johnny Gaudreau wants to play there, maybe there's something worth playing there for, Coming up in a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Jeff, but first I've got to tell you about BetOnline because it's where the game starts. It is your number one source for football betting this season. You can find latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game for every sport. And as always, they remain your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check out all of your favorite games and events, including things like MLB, MMA, boxing, golf, driving, F1, NASCAR. You can do that over there. You can put money on, I don't know, Johnny Gaudreau winning the Hart Trophy this season. That feels like a potential fun bet. So head to the website or use your mobile device to go to betonline.net and you can learn more about the game and action because, like I said, BetOnline is where the game starts.
It helps in NHL circles because it's validation in some ways. It was funny to see all the why Columbus stuff this offseason, and I tend to think maybe it didn't exactly break down that way, but it was like half of the national/international hockey media, because Canada is international from here, is like oh, I've been to Columbus. It's an underrated city. Like, this is great. Like, we love going to Columbus. Like, good for them that they finally got something like this to happen. And then the other half, who I venture to guess have probably never been here, were like, why in the heck did he sign with Columbus, Ohio? I think it kind of breaks down that if you've not been here and you've not seen the culture and the fan base and the city and everything like that, it didn't make any sense. But, it sort of then, but it kind of took on a mind of its own of the why Columbus stuff. But, he's done a good job of kind of enumerating, the reasons why. It's not terribly far from home. He's talked to a lot of people about what a nice place it is to live and play and raise a family and all those things. And it just ended, it's a good young team. So at the end of the day, it just checked off pretty much all the boxes he was looking for. Who knows if the world's different if Philadelphia has the cap room. Is he a Philadelphia Flyer? Who knows? Maybe he is. But at the end of the day, maybe he isn't. And guess what? We don't have to worry about it or go down that road because it didn't happen. So he's a Columbus Blue Jacket. So,
he's ours now.
Yeah, he's ours now. It doesn't matter how it happened. He signed the contract. He's here. He's ready to go. And so, yeah, it makes everything feel different. And so it just, like you say, you are right there, that it's different because he signed. And one thing I think about too is, as you're going through this rebuild, and they've drafted some great young players. They've got, the Cole Sillinger, Ken Johnson, David Jiricek, Denton Mateychuk, and even going back, Igor Chinikov, and some of these guys they've drafted very highly. They think very highly out of, but to win the Stanley Cup, I think you have to have superstars. Almost all of the teams that win the Stanley Cup, maybe outside of St. Louis a couple years ago, you have to have 2 or 3, if not 4 or 5 of the top 20 to 25 players in the league. And you hope that the Kent Johnsons and the Cole Cylinders, become those guys. And there's a very good chance they will. But you add Johnny Hockey, you add a guy who had 115 points last year. The hardest thing to do in hockey is get elite players, and you just got an elite player. So that just moves everything, to warp speed compared to what it had been. And that's also why it's so significant, is that now, you don't have to hope that Kent Johnson becomes Johnny Gaudreau. You have Johnny Gaudreau. And if Kent Johnson just becomes a very, very good Kent Johnson, you've got 2 of those elite players right there. So you don't have to hope anymore in some ways, is that you've just added one of the hardest things to get. And that, I think, is another thing that makes it so exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Something that's kind of I've been thinking about it since, and I want to talk about Traverse City in a minute, because I think the Blue Jackets had a pretty good showing, as they usually do. Specifically, I'm thinking about Jordan DeMay, who led the QMJHL in scoring this season, I believe, and somehow fell to the 3rd round because he's 5'7", 5'8".
Yeah, he's
Johnny
listed at
Gaudreau,
5'9", but I can guarantee you he is not 5'9", because he looks like,
he's 5'9".
Yeah, he looks like he's 14 years old. And I hope, if he hears this, I hope he doesn't get mad. But he just is. He looks as young as can be, and he's not very tall. But the kid can play. I suspect that's what you're going to ask me. He can play, right?
Oh yeah, no, but I think about, Johnny Gaudreau fell to the 4th round because he was small. And I watched him play in Traverse City, and I was like, I can't believe this kid fell to the 3rd round.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I get from DeMay. Is I'm not out here saying he's the next Johnny Gaudreau, but
right.
I'm seeing hints of that.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about how it's been proven over the last 5 to 10 years in hockey. I mean, how many elite 5'6", 5'7", 5'8" players were there in the 1990s? Theo Fleury, is that maybe then Martin St. Louis, but is that about the list? Because you either had to be insane, which Fleury seems to be, or is the most determined human being in the world, which I think Martin St. Louis is. You had to have something extra to survive in that era of clutching and grabbing and 6'6" defensemen who could basically just tackle you on the ice and there'd be no penalty called. But now that the game's opened up, you're seeing more and more smaller guys. The Cam Atkinsons of the world, the Alex DeBrincats, and you can go on down the list. There's a bunch of guys now, Johnny Gaudreau included in that list, that are now succeeding. And so, teams are still in the draft. At the end of the day, teams are still probably going to bet on size, because it's hard to find really talented big guys at the end of the day. And so I understand why teams do it. But I also think the smaller guys are still undervalued. And I know Columbus, they wanted Jordan Dumais. They seriously explored trading up in that draft to earlier in the 3rd round to get Dumais. And when it didn't quite work out, they were sweating bullets that he was going to be there at the 96th overall pick. And, you don't have to run up to the podium to make your selection in the 3rd round of the draft. You just announce it on a speakerphone. But I get the sense that if they would have had to run up to the podium, they would have run up to the podium to make that selection. And so, I think, time will tell with Jordan Dumais, but he certainly has skills on the offensive side that you can't teach. And the game is easier now for the smaller guys. And the road has been paved by the Johnny Gaudreaus of the world for guys like him to be successful. So, I'm not going to sit here and and speak against him, because, I think it's very clear that the talent is very much there for someone like him. And he could be, whether it be the next Atkinson, the next Gaudreau, to tie it back to that, but he certainly has the talent to be an NHL player, it seems like.
Got more of my conversation with Jeff. We're going to talk NHL draft and how they did. And that's coming up next on Locked on Blue Jackets. Yeah, for sure. I remember hearing him, he was drafted, obviously, and then I looked into him and was like, wait, this kid had 120 points in the QMJHL this season. Why? How did he fall so far? And I wonder how many Johnny Gaudreaus it's going to take before the league at large is size is not as big of a detriment. And I want to kind of transition into talking a little bit about the draft. Because the David Jiricek falling to 6th, I thought was fantastic. He was actually second on I did a lot of draft previews and prospect work and stuff, and he was actually second on my board of players, right behind Shane Wright. I was convinced that the Blue Jackets were going to go with Cutter Gauthier. How much, or how much do you know about their thought process was. Were they always going after Jiricek, or was it a case of, well, they wanted Gauthier? Because I heard a lot of rumblings that the Blue Jackets wanted Gauthier. Obviously, he went 5th to the Flyers. Was Jiricek always the plan, or was he kind of, I say plan B, but I don't think he's a plan B, but were they looking at Gauthier and had to go Jiricek because he went, or was the plan always Jiricek?
Yeah, they liked all those players. I mean, they liked Yaroslav Slavkovsky. They liked the guys who were in the mix there. They liked all of those guys. I know they really liked Cutter Gauthier. There's no doubt about that. And if David Jiricek had been picked 5, then Cutter Gauthier would have been picked 6. But Cutter Gauthier was picked 5, so David Jiricek was picked 6. They were kind of in that boat where the teams above them were going to determine a little bit of what they did. And I don't think they're disappointed by any means of getting David Jiricek. I think, like I say, if the way it worked, Jiricek was you picked the best overall player at that point, and David Jiricek was the best overall player left on their board. There was probably no plausible scenario in which both Jiricek and Gauthier were on the board at 6. So whoever they ended up getting there, they were going to be happy with, and I think they're very happy with Jiricek. You see him play, and you see the size, you see the length. And you see the puck skills that he has and the shot that he has. It's he's going to get typecast as the defensive guy. Partly because of his size, partly because Denton Mateychuk also gets drafted in the first round, and he's sort of the quote unquote skill guy. So everyone's going to sort of view Jiricek as the big guy. But I tell you what, he can move, and he's got some really good skills with the puck on his stick. And so he's never going to be Zach Werenski per se. But he's not going to be just a complete shutdown defender. And they think with his length and size, as he gets stronger and bigger and more experienced, he will be a shutdown defender. But he's not going to be a one side of the rink guy. He's a 200-foot defenseman who you can play with a Zach Werenski, and he's not he's going to be able to cover Zach Werenski, but he's not going to be out of place playing with Zach Werenski either. So very happy, I think, at the end of the day that they got David Jiricek at that 6th pick.
Yeah. I will say, speaking of Mateychuk, I was not confused as to why they drafted him. I was a little bit surprised that he went so high in the draft, and then I watched him play at Traverse City. He was, I think, one of the more underrated players on the Blue Jackets in that tournament. I thought he had a fantastic weekend at Traverse City, and he was a guy that every time something good was happening, I would look and be like, oh, hey, Mateychuk's on the ice, So yeah. How do you think his Traverse City went? Because I think he's kind of been marketed as, well, obviously David Jiricek is going to be the star from that draft for the Blue Jackets, but watching Mateychuk play, I'm like, man, this kid's maybe closer than I originally thought to the NHL.
Yeah, it's funny because I just said, that Jiricek's going to be typecast as the defensive guy. Mateychuk's going to be typecast as the other guy because Jiricek gets drafted 6th overall, and he's the first draft pick, so many people end up talking about David Jiricek. And then Mateychuk ends up kind of being a little bit under the radar as far as that goes. But I think you're right. You watch him in Traverse City, and he's billed as a guy where the skating stands out, but you watch him live, and the skating stands out. He didn't quite maybe take over the games as dynamically as he does in the WHL, but that's this is a higher level. He's playing against some pro guys, guys that have more experience than WHL. But his skating, man, it's good, and it's funny how the NHL is any professional sports league, but it's true the NHL is going to be a bit of a copycat league. You get the someone bursts onto the scene and everyone wants, I want the next whoever that guy is, and right now it's Cale Makar. Everybody wants the next Cale Makar. So you're going to start seeing these like dynamic, good skating defensemen jump up a little bit, I think, in kind of the evaluation circles. I'm not saying Denton Mateychuk is Cale Makar. There's only one Cale Makar at this point, but he has that type of ability to, skating ability, creativity, the way he can kind of take over a game and impose his will. He actually compares himself to Charlie McAvoy a lot more. But I think if you're a observer or a fan, you can't help, the Makar thoughts. And so, yeah, he definitely stands out. I'm very excited to see him back in the WHL this year, which is where I assume he will end up. He's probably, I think, supposed to be the captain in Moose Jaw. The talk was second half of this past season, he really took over up there. And so he could probably put up some obscene numbers for a defenseman up in the W this year. if he stays healthy and keeps developing, he could have a really, really big season. And I think that would do nothing but help him really feel like it comes taking over games, things like that, imposing his will on games, and how that can help him as he gets to the next level.
And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, I'm going to be bringing you more conversation with Jeff about more off-season things, how much they're going to miss Oliver Bjorkstrand. The answer, spoiler alert, is a lot. So that's coming up tomorrow. Thank you for listening today. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the podcast at LO_Blue Jacket. If you have comments, questions, criticism, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And thank you once again for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms. We're over on YouTube. I'm trying to hit 250 subscribers by the start of the regular season. So if you haven't hit subscribe, then feel free to hit that button. It really helps me out. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.